First down, the handoff to Marlon Mack. Huge hole, 50-yard line. He's at the 40, still going near sideline. He's at the 10. He's at the 5, and he will score. Touchdown, Marlon Mack. Touchdown, INDY. And again, it's picked up. It's Darius Leonard. Leonard with his second INT, and he's streaking down the near sideline. He's at the 40. He's at the 30. He's at the 20. He's going to go. A pick six for the Maniac.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of the Bring the Juice Colts podcast. The Indianapolis Colts defense has looked very, very good in the first 3 weeks of the season. They have a lot of ranks right now in the top 5 for sure. Pretty much all of their rankings are in the top 5. So I wanted to bring on an expert, Kevin Bowen from The Fan. Kevin, thanks for joining, man. How are you doing?
Doing great, Cody. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And Kevin, like I mentioned, man, this Colts defense through 3 weeks, just a little bit of stats here. You know, they're first in yards allowed per game, a little over 225, first in yards per play allowed, fourth in rushing yards per game, first against the pass per game, really good on third down. They're ranked second right now in points allowed per game. So this defense right now through 3 weeks, they're playing very, very well. And, especially after week 1, kind of a struggle to get off the field. The last 2 weeks, the Colts defense has really, really done a lot of good things. They have six interceptions in 2 weeks against these last 2 opponents. And so, Kevin, I'm curious your impressions overall of this defense from week 1 now and week 2 and 3.
Yeah, I mean, certainly extremely impressed. Obviously, you just rattled off those stats, and really a lot of it speaks for itself. And obviously you played the schedule that shows up, and I don't think we look at a Minnesota offense and think they're absolutely horrific. So, very, very impressive what they've done and just kind of rebounding and responding to, what I considered a disappointing performance week 1 and just kind of something that I felt like was too reminiscent of what we've seen in years past. But I thought a really good job of playmaking has probably been the thing that stood out to me the most about this defense is, certainly they've been great, yards, like you said, not allowing a whole lot of points, getting off the field on third down, but it's those turnovers that you mentioned. It was the passive defense that we saw in week 2 against Kirk Cousins, that offense. It's that level of not just simply getting off the field. It's creating short fields, creating points directly. That is certainly something we have not seen from past Colts defenses.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what do you think changed really from week 1 to weeks 2 and 3? Like, something had to change. What do you think were the biggest things in your mind that made that change happen?
Well, I certainly think their approach schematically has changed. I mean, going back and watching the All-22 even earlier today, they are doing things differently from a coverage standpoint. They are being more aggressive, especially outside, and just not letting, a 3 or 4 yard kind of no cover zone that we saw Gardner Minshew find a great rhythm on, in that season opening loss to the Jags. So I think that has been the biggest difference for me. Certainly there's been better execution of the game plans, but still there was a clear shift starting in week 2 of just challenging wideouts and all pass catchers closer to the line of scrimmage. I go back to that first drive against the Vikings. I mean, even when Adam Thielen made some big catches, just how difficult it was for Thielen to make those grabs. And I think that kind of set the tone for what we've now seen the past couple of weeks. And then, certainly it helped with all the injuries the Jets are dealing with at wideout, and clearly they had Sam Darnold rattled, especially when he couldn't get outside of the pocket.
Yeah, and how surprised are you at just the great, pass defense, especially without Malik Hooker? Obviously, he's out for the year, and then Rocky Ascens missed the last 2 games. How surprised are you at how great this unit has looked?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Obviously, you're missing a guy in Rock who played the most defensive snaps for you last season. Kamoko Ture is another name, and you talk about the edge rushing presence that he brings, and I do think that is something that's still missing from this defense, is just that consistent speed rusher off the edge. I think that is, that's something that even makes this most impressive. And I'm just, I think everyone, I probably speak for everyone saying you're just grateful to finally see a shift in philosophy for multiple weeks. There's been moments of this sort of approach at times over the last couple of seasons, but it's not been seen enough, not been seen as often. And, it shouldn't have taken week 1 to be the wake-up call, but it did take that. But still, they have done just a great job of, not just squeaking by these last 2 opponents. They have thoroughly, dominated on the defensive side of the ball against both these teams. So kudos to Matt Eberflus and his unit for getting those guys, for, obviously having a look in the mirror moment after week 1, but then also getting his guys, ready to rebound and have some terrific playmaking.
Yeah. I guess I have a kind of a two-parter for you here. So obviously with Malik Hooker going out, you have Julian Blackmon, you have Tavon Wilson coming in, kind of contributing to that. I always was kind of like wondering, and I want to get your take on this. It seemed like when Malik Hooker was in there, he showed flashes like we've talked about, but there seemed to be a lot of miscommunication. And now without Hooker in there really hasn't been a ton of that, not a lot of big chunk plays let up. How big of a factor do you think that is, just to have guys in there that are communicating well? And do you think this Colts defense, this pass defense, potentially could be better without Malik Hooker in the lineup?
Yeah, I'm not ready to go there yet. I think at times Malik Hooker gets a really bad rap for not living up to top 15, pick hype. In reality, though, he's been a nice starting safety in this league. Yes, he has not lived up to that hype, but this is a team that even when he was in the lineup early on in the year, it's not like they were allowing big plays, which seems to be, kind of that big responsibility. If you look at Blackmon on Sunday, he had a very Malik Hooker type of stat sheet performance. I think he only had 1 tackle, if I'm not mistaken. But again, you didn't give up big plays. That's kind of the main responsibility for that guy back there. I think when you get into sub packages and things like that, you want to have it'd be nicer to have Blackmon, more in kind of a situational role and not as that deep free safety. So yeah, I can't go there just yet. I think from a depth standpoint, it's a big loss not having Hooker.
Sure, for sure. And then kind of talking about, the rest of this defense. So we'll start with the defensive line. I mean, they didn't have a ton of sacks, but they had a lot of pressure. How big do you think it is, just that addition, obviously, of DeForest Buckner, having a guy like Danico Autry really emerging at the other defensive end position? How huge has this defensive line been to this turnaround for the Colts defense here?
Yeah, I thought it really started in week 2 because, from a run defense standpoint, just not enough in that really the first half of the opener, allowing the undrafted Robinson kid for the Jaguars to get going there. But yeah, Buckner played like an all-pro in week 2. Danico Autry, like you said, has definitely offered some playmaking as well. Justin Houston has kind of cleaned up a couple sacks, had the one late when Mekhi Becton went out on Sunday. Selfishly, I would like to see a little bit more from kind of your backup edge guys, Ben Banogu, Al-Qadim Muhammad. Like to see maybe a little bit more there. And again, that's where the Kemoko Turay loss comes into play. Obviously, Tyquan Lewis, showed up with the sack of, I think it was Cousins. I kind of got my games mixed up, but I'm pretty sure it was against Cousins. So that D-line group has got to be such a catalyst for you. And I really thought they did a decent job, getting into the backfield early on Sunday's game against Sam Darnold, but just could not bring him down. So finishing those plays obviously is key moving forward. And you are going to play some better offensive lines. I think, Minnesota banged up with their O-line. Obviously, the Jets have really banged up with their O-line as well. So there'll be bigger tests coming up. But so far, Buckner has been a guy that's been in on a lot of plays. Week 2 was definitely the highlight from a quarterback hit and a sack and a half standpoint. But from a tackle standpoint, he's got really high numbers for a defensive tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last thing I'll talk about this defense really is Bobby OKariki these last couple of weeks has really seen a raise in snaps. He's actually been out snapping Anthony Walker by a pretty wide margin. So the past 2 weeks, OKariki's taken 85.2% in week 2, and then 81.3% of the Colts defensive snaps, whereas Anthony Walker 55.6%, and this last week was a low for him, 43.8%. Do you attribute maybe OKariki's presence and more snaps to potentially a better pass defense here in these last couple weeks?
Yeah, it's a good thought there and a good question. I definitely think it has to do a little bit with the Colts have gotten off to leads and multi-score leads, and that's forced kind of their opponents to go to more of a three wide personnel grouping, which then puts the Colts in nickel, and their nickel is OKariki and Leonard as the two linebackers. And really, the Colts haven't played much dime at all, with just one linebacker out there and 6 defensive backs back there. So I think that has played into it. The Colts really want to have 4 defensive linemen on the field at all times, so that's something that we continue to see. But yeah, I mean, those numbers have stood out to me because we didn't see that week 1. It was much. I think Walker out-snapped them by a lot, if I'm not mistaken, in week 1. And now, like you said, it's kind of been the flip here in week 2 and week 3. So I definitely have my eye on it. It's a start contract. It's probably the fewest snaps Anthony Walker has played compared to one other Mike, when he's been healthy. And certainly when you play some more, teams throughout the season, maybe run heavy teams, when you face a Tennessee or a Baltimore, does that change a little bit at all, or is this going to be the new norm moving forward? So definitely something that I'm going to be keeping an eye on.
Absolutely. And the last question we'll talk about here, Kevin, the real reason why I brought you in here, because I want to get your opinion on this. Can the Colts defense continue this trend? Week 1 was a little bit rough. These last 2 weeks, they've looked lights out. I know the competition hasn't necessarily been the best in the world against some of the quarterbacks and some of the offensive lines that you played. But I guess, can the Colts continue this, and what do they have to do? What do they have to continue to improve on in order to continue this?
Yeah, I mean, to be frank, I'd be shocked if they continue this trend. It's an incredible run, really, to the start of the season, just how big of a difference they are in several categories compared to the rest of the NFL. And pretty much by any metric you look at, the Colts have played by far the easiest schedule in the NFL. And teams would love to play the Jets week in and week out. So this trend, no. Do I think it can be definitely an improved defense from last year and, find itself late in the year, kind of hovering around the top 10 of defenses? I think that is a definite possibility. The nice thing about that group is, from a front 7 standpoint, they've remained pretty healthy. None of really their frontline guys outside of Toure, and him not playing this year, have been banged up. So they've been healthy there. They should get Rocky Seam back, somewhat soon. It sounds like he could be back to practice this week as well. So that should aid you. But, I mean, you're going to face, probably the best wideout you faced all season on Sunday. Certainly when you get back from the bye week and you're facing, Baltimore and Green Bay, you still have Pittsburgh later in the year, there will be tougher challenges. And I thought Frank Reich was very honest yesterday in his conference call and tempering expectations majorly with this defense, of saying, this is a great start, it's fine, but Frank knows deep down who the Colts have played this season, and that barometer, that measuring stick, is not at a January level. So no, I don't see this defense maintaining number 1 rankings across the board in so many different categories that they've had. But I have certainly seen signs here in the last 2 weeks that make me believe they will be an improved unit from last season.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the insight, Kevin. I really appreciate you coming on, talking about this Colts defense. They've looked good the last couple of weeks. We'll see if that can continue, or we'll see if there's be a little bit more drop-off as the competition kind of gets a little bit stiffer here in the coming weeks. But appreciate it, Kevin. I hope you have a great rest of your day, man.